Hey folks, David Watts back with you with another video that I hope will help you as you continue your photography journey and your exploration. I find that a lot of folks enjoy finding out how photos were created because it gives you some creative things you can try. I always like going out in the field with some ideas I've seen from other YouTubers, and I thought this might be helpful to you because we want to look at this picture. I love this picture. I'm partial to it. I took it about a month and a half or so ago with a great model. I'll include a link down below. But I want to talk to you about how we went from basically the original image, which is this. Here, let's click on this again. There we go. So here's the original image in color. And I think it works great there. I think it's a great image, but I think in black and white it just took on a whole new dimension, and I think it's even better. So I'm using Luminar 2018. We'll talk about the equipment I used. We'll talk about how to do this in Luminar. You can make similar translations for your favorite editing program, but I use Luminar. I think it's a great tool. So let's begin with the basic setup before we even talk about the editing. This was taken in the Brooklyn area. It's called Dumbo. It stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass. It's an area of Brooklyn right close to the water, looking right across the water from New York City. I've got another video, if you scroll down a bit, that shows you some great shooting locations in the Dumbo area. So this was a nighttime shot, of course. There had been a little bit of rain previously, so the ground was a little bit wet. I think that added a nice dimension here to these cobblestone streets, these old brick streets in the Brooklyn area. We literally just jumped right in the middle of the street and took some images. We had to move out of the way periodically because cars were coming, so it's a real street, real activity, but we were able to get some great shots. The light behind is, and you'll notice there is a little bit of backlighting here, and I think what that does, let's zoom in just a bit, it really helps create some separation for the subject. We'll give this image just a moment to process, but this backlighting helps create a little bit of, almost a little bit of rim lighting up in here and around his head, and that really helped, I think, add to the effect. So that lighting is literally coming from some of the cars behind us. You can see some of those headlights, some of the cars behind him, as well as just a little bit of these street lights. But it all worked out nicely with the reflection on the cobblestone streets. It showed us some great texture and some great contrast. And that's where the lighting was coming from. I was holding my Roto light. It's the small handheld LED light, but you can use something similar. I was adding just a little bit of light so it wouldn't be so dark in here on his face and on his clothes. All right, so that's a bit of a setup. The camera is not that essential, but I was using the Fuji X-T2. I was using the 23mm f2. If I recall correctly, this was taken at f2. Yes, indeed, it was at f2. As you can see from an image like this with an f2 lens, 23mm, you're not going to get huge blurring of the background, but that's okay. I think it gave us kind of this cool environmental shot. I think this one works. If the background was all blurred out, I don't think it'd be quite as interesting. I think it's more interesting knowing that we're right here in the middle of a street in an urban area. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the equipment and the image. So how did we get from this, which again I think is pretty cool, to this, which I think is cooler? All right, so let's look at some things in Luminar real quick. I've clicked on the wrong button here. Now, here we go. The first thing I did was I used the LUT mapping filter. What this does is allows you to load a LUT file, L-U-T, lookup translation file. It basically translates at a pixel level, this value becomes this value, and can be used to recreate the look of other films and other processing styles. So I did some Googling and found a free, somebody put together a free LUT file that attempted to simulate Acros, the Acros film simulation, the Fuji film simulation that they provide in camera. So I could have done this with the raw file straight to the Acros coming out of the Fuji camera, but instead I decided to use the LUT file, and I think it worked pretty well. And really no changes. I took all the defaults here. You could certainly play with the amount a bit. Here, if we back it off about halfway, you really don't see much effect. but as we back it off a little further, you get a little bit of color coming back into it. You could even use this kind of filter as a way of desaturating your image just a bit. But anyway, I used it at 100%. It'll take it just a moment to sort of remap that. The other thing, then after the LUT mapping, and you'll season to your taste, then what I did is use the standard accent AI filter, brought it up to about 14 or so. If you go a lot heavier, you can introduce even more sort of a different kind of feeling to the scene, more brightness. In my case, I didn't quite want that, but you might like that. But just know that this is powerful, especially when you're using it here in this sort of black and white setting. You can really get some great effects. And I was happy with it down about 14 or so. And so that'll be fine for my purposes. But that was the second thing I did for this image. The third thing I did, and actually I'm sorry I didn't do it, so I'm going to remove that filter actually. I had the saturation vibrance filter here, but ended up not using it. I think I played with it a bit. Certainly it doesn't have as much of an impact when you're not working with a color image, but it will still have some look and feel changes as you play with it a little bit sometimes with the black and white images. I can't promise it'll do much for you, and that's why I probably didn't use it. So let's just get rid of it and we'll simplify things here. All right, the third thing I did was actually the clarity filter. So I brought that up to about 38. If we take it back to 0, you can see the image is still fine, but somewhere in this range, and I usually start about halfway and then I'll back things off a little bit, just added some extra visual crispness that I wanted. I wanted a real sharp look here for the actor, just kind of this cool look crouching in the street like this, and just wanted to accentuate that the best I could. So somewhere in this area was about right for me. The final thing I did was the tone filter. And so here you've got a lot of power. I basically left exposure alone. I did a little bit of shift in the smart tone slider, so that was about 9. Let's push it a little more, and you see how it can just bring up in a balanced sort of way the image. But for me, about 9 or 10 was about right. I boosted the highlights a bit, so I brought those to 38. And let's just accentuate that a little more, and you can see what we were achieving with that. And I also dropped the shadows a little bit. So it just gave a little, brighter but also darker feel, a little more contrast, if you will. And you might even like it better in this kind of setting where the shadows are dropped even more and the highlights are boosted even a bit more. If you go too far, you're going to get a whole different feel. But anyway, where I was at about these values in here, I like that a lot. The other thing I did was then drop the whites just a bit too. So you had some white areas, and I wanted to tone that down just a bit. So again, if we sort of accentuate that again, you probably can see, you won't see much probably in this image, but if I boost it back up, there you go. You can see it, and that sometimes helps to really accentuate the difference. So I dropped that down to about this range here just to tone down the whites. By default, they weren't, really bothersome, but I just felt it gave me a little better feel. And I dropped the blacks just a tiny amount. And that was it. So 4 things I used: the LUT mapping filter with the across and across type simulation LUT file. Google search, you can probably find one. If not, drop me a note. The accent AI filter, some clarity, and some tone. Is there anything else we could have done? Well, here's a couple of ideas. The structure filter is always kind of interesting. And what you could have done, what I could have done, what you could do, is crank up the structure a bit. Now, it's going to add noise, but the more you go with that, you can get a real sort of sharp edge look. It might be that what you say is, I don't really like it on him per se, but I like it on these cobblestone bricks. And I'll remind you, you can achieve that by brushing that effect in. So let's do that for just a second here. So by brushing it in this fashion, we're not doing that real sharpening effect or that extra structure on our model, but just on the street. Maybe even do a little bit on the sidewalk here. So that's the kind of effect you can get. So we've essentially, let's click done on this. that would give us more sharpness, more edge, more structure in the street where we want some texture, and we've kept him in pretty good shape without looking artificial. Anyway, well, that's my quick tip, a little background on how this image was put together. I hope that can be helpful for you as you try to make your own images. That's what this is about. That's why I enjoy making these videos. I hope it gives you some ideas. I hope it always goes without saying, I hope you find a way to do it better and make it better. And, we'll take it from there. That's all for now. Hope you have a good day, and we'll catch you next time.